Okay, now let's talk about a few methods for researching animals in instrumental conditioning. And then we'll follow that up with Thorndike's main theories about how the animal learns in instrumental conditioning. So one of the easiest ones to use is just measure time. We call this latency. We can just have a runway. Put a little rat at the beginning, there's some treat at the end, and it runs down. And every time it runs down, it gets some food, let's say. Now, it starts off running down, and we time it, and it's a little slow. But keep doing this, and it's going to speed up. And the response is the R1, the target response, is how quickly the animal runs. And it runs faster and faster. What's the S1? The beginning of the runway. What's the R1? Running fast. What's the S2? Cheese. R2, well, salivation, digestion, or just a response of an increased emotional positive response. Very simple experiment. And another one that is oftentimes seen in, movies about learning and about rats and stuff is the very famous Hampton Court maze. It's called the Hampton Court maze because one of the oldest mazes, hedge maze, is found at the Hampton Palace in Great Britain, and this has been around for centuries, and we've seen these kinds of things in corn mazes in the US, but this is a little hedge maze. And so when this type of maze was used for animals, they just called it the Hampton Court maze. And it's very simple. We can measure two things here. We can measure time, how long it takes for the animal to get to the cheese, knowing that at first it's going to be making a lot of mistakes. Or we can count how many wrong turns it takes. So, navigates the maze, as best I can do, and finally gets the cheese. And we let it eat a little cheese, take some time, put it at the start, and off it goes. Again, measuring time and measuring errors. Now, this is a complex design, and much more complex than just a simple runway. What's the S1? Well, that's that's hard to distinguish, but it's the stimuli within the maze at each point. What are the R1s? So there's lots of R1s. Taking a right when it should, taking a left when it should, taking the right path. And of course, the S2 is a reward, something like food or cheese in the beginning. Okay, sometimes it's just easier to go right through. Another one that is used, which is really good for automation, is known as an operant chamber, sometimes just called a Skinner box, named after B.F. Skinner, who used it. The animal presses a little lever, and when it does, it gets food. This can be automated so that when it presses, it gets food, and you can put it actually on kind of a schedule, which we'll talk about in another lecture, where it has to press it maybe 3 or 4 times before it gets food. But what's nice about this is it can give you an automated record of not only latency, how long did it take to press it, how many presses it does, or presses per minute, or things like that. It's really easy to teach a rat to press a lever to get food. It's also easy to get people to press a lever in a casino with slot machines. It's the same principle. Now, what I did for a while is I used an experiment with honeybees, and the animal had to fly in and make a choice and drink sugar water. And the choice, the target response, R1, is landing on the target. Now, I can have these targets had different amounts of food. Maybe this one had 20 milliliters of sugar water. This one only had 5 milliliters, or this one had 40% sugar water, which is really sweet, and this one had only 10% sugar water. So the animal will come in, target response, land, drink. The S2 is the sugar water. R1 is landing on the right target, in this case a choice. And S1 is seeing the stimulus, seeing the blue landing dish or the yellow landing dish, that stimulus causes the animal to make that choice. Now, this is a little bit more complicated, and this is oftentimes used to look at short-term memory. This is known as a radial arm maze. This one particularly is called an elevated radial arm maze because it's elevated off the ground. Put the rat in, walks to the end, grabs some food, comes back, goes out to the other end, and gets some food. Now, the reason this can be used to test memory is you find out when does the mouse or rat visit an arm it already visited, because it wants to get all that food and it has to keep in memory, where do I need to go or where have I been? Another easy choice experiment used in instrumental conditioning is just a T maze or a Y maze. Instead of doing this really complicated Hampton Court maze where there's a lot of left turns and a lot of right turns, just give them one choice, left or right. Maybe put really good food on this side and mediocre food on this side, or water on this side and no water on that side, and make the animal thirsty. Goes down, takes a right, goes down, takes a left. The R1 is running down and making a choice. It's the same thing with a Y maze. It's just a Y instead of a T. Now, I use this in my experiments. I use these types of mazes. And in this experiment, I have a little Siamese fighting fish, and the reward is another fish, because these fish, these beta fish, like to fight, or they like to display their what are called opercula, their gills, to another. And in this case, the S2, the reinforcer, was not food. It was seeing another fish. And it wants to see that other fish because it wants to fight. And so I would lift this little gate and let the fish go down and swim to the right and fight with another fish, which is kept in a little container so they don't really contact each other. Then the fish is done, and then I would just kind of scoot it back here, and we would do another trial. Take a left, take a right, and I would put different parameters of reward here. The rewards that I used were, how long do you get to fight with the other fish? If you take a right, you get to fight with this fish for 5 seconds. If you take a left, you get to fight with the fish for 20 seconds. Is that amount of time more valuable? Well, we found out it was. The animal, the little fish, would prefer to fight for 20 seconds than 5 seconds. I don't know if you can see back there, there's a little heater so I could keep everything the same temperature. And we just pulled these up and put them down. I did a Y maze when I studied grasshoppers. And the little grasshopper goes in here, and I put different types of food that had different qualities of protein or different qualities of carbohydrates. And it would walk down and make a choice. The green was a stimulus, S1, that caused the response to go into it when the R1 was something that was valuable, in this case, food. So let's say only the green side had food and the yellow side didn't. At trial and error learning, we see that the animal would say that the green one would cause the behavior of going down in it, the R1. And then it would get the food, the S2. Now let's go into a theory, one of the most important theories in basic learning principles. I come back to this theory all the time. It explains everything from learning new sports to why we go on social media, to how we learn how to drive, to how we interact with other people. And it's called Thorndike's law of effect. And it's one of the most important theories and ideas in learning theory and learning principles. So I really want you to know this. So this comes directly from Edward Thorndike's writing. He says the law of effect is that of several responses made in the same situation, those which are accompanied or closely followed by satisfaction to the animal will, other things being equal, be more firmly connected, that's the key, with the situation, so that when it reoccurs, when the situation reoccurs, they will be more likely to reoccur. They will more likely to do those behaviors. Those which are accompanied or closely followed by discomfort, something aversive to the animal, will, other things being equal, have their connections with that situation weakened so that when it recurs, they will be less likely to occur. They will be less likely to do that behavior. The greater the satisfaction or discomfort, the greater the strength or weakening of the bond. Well, this was written at the beginning of the 19th century. It's a little hard to follow, but I'd like to go through each part of this and what it's saying. So I want to differentiate between the empirical law of effect and the theoretical law of effect. I'd like you to know the difference. Empirical, is just the idea of what we observe. It doesn't really go into theory or underlying mechanisms or associations or connections. It's just from our observation. That's what empirical means, from our observation. Of responses made to the same situation, those which are accompanied by satisfaction to the animal will be more likely to occur, and those followed by discomfort to the animal will be less likely to occur. That's an easy one. Okay, that is so self-evident. Of all the behaviors the animal does, if something follows by something good, food or praise or just better temperature, they're going to be more likely to do that behavior again. If they do behaviors that end up with nothing or with discomfort or something painful, they're not going to do that behavior as often. That's it. And you knew this before coming into this class, that if you praise a dog, it's going to do that behavior again. If you yell at the dog, it's not going to do that behavior again. It's very simple. But also, and this is really important, we need to behave in order to learn. We can't, for animals, they can't just think about it and learn. They learn by doing. Behavior is necessary for learning according to both the empirical and theoretical law of effect. We learn through actions. Without actions, there isn't any learning. Remember how I said Thorndike went on to work at Columbia Teaching College? This was the principle he kept pushing. He kept saying, get kids out of the seat. Stop just talking to them. Get them doing. Get them interacting. Do little labs. Do little activities. Because when you act, then you learn. And by acting, you find out what follows with good behavior and what follows with bad. We learn by doing. The theoretical law of effect is a little bit more difficult to understand. It is a theory about what is happening in the brain. It's a theory of connections. It's a connectionist theory. It's an association theory. Just like Pavlov had theories of how stimuli and responses are connected, this is that. This is how we make associations. And I will tell you at the beginning that it kind of goes against common sense. And it gives people difficulty. The theoretical effect always gives students trouble. So I want to go through it nice and slowly. Okay. So the theory says excitatory associative connections or associations are formed between the behavior and the preceding stimuli when what follows is good, when what follows is appetitive, when what follows is rewarding. In other words, what is learned is a connection or an association between S1 and R1, not what follows the response. It's going to take some time, huh? Associative connections are lost between the S1 and R1 if what follows is aversive. If there were any connections there at all, if it follows by behavior, if the behavior follows by something punishing, those connections are lost. Again, we're going to go through this a lot. S1, R1, S2. If the S2 is good, appetitive, rewarding, then associations are created between the preceding stimuli and the response. This is what is learned. So let's take the dog learning to sit. We tell the dog, sit. And if it sits, target response, We give them a cheesy liver snap. Delicious. And a connection between the sound, sit, and the behavior or action in the brain to make the animal sit is where the connections occur. This is why it is not intuitive. Because if you said, well, what does the animal learn? You would give an if-then statement. It learned that if it sits, then it will get some food. Well, I know in my mind, if I sit, then I will get some food. The response R1, S2 is where one might think a connection is formed, but it doesn't. If there's an association between R1, sitting, and S2, the cheesy liver doggy snap, if that's the association, it does not tell us, according to Thorndike, why the animal does the behavior in the first place, why the sound sit causes the behavior. So according to the theoretical law of effect, behavior is caused by the stimuli that precede the behavior. Okay, so when the sound sit is heard, the animal's behavior is automatic without thinking of consequences. Why is that? Because connections in the brain, neural connections, associative connections, just like Pavlov's connections, are created between the stimuli and the response. This association is created only when what follows the behavior is rewarding. We're going to give lots of examples in this class about why this is such a powerful theory. It doesn't require thinking. It doesn't require conscious realization. It explains the simplest nervous system's learning ability. A flatworm, a tiny little insect with these tiny little brains, stimulus response can explain their behavior because we don't have to assume that they're contemplating their actions. They're contemplating the consequences of their actions. That would take a higher reasoning. Remember Morgan's canon or the principle of parsimony? This simple idea of a stimulus causing a behavior, almost reflexively, is really simple. We have a simple rule. A specific stimulus, the word sit, creates a connection in the brain to the behavior of sitting. When I hear the word sit, sit. What helps to create that connection? When what follows is good. What destroys those connections? If what follows is bad. Now, when we think about a reinforcer, let's keep in mind something here. We're going to come back to this. We can talk about primary reinforcer. Animal, I say sit, the dog sits, and I give them something that naturally is really good. I give them a cheesy snack, I give them whatever, something delicious. But we can also have a conditioned reinforcer. So let's say I have a clicker. Click, click, makes a clicking sound. Click, click. And I simply present it to an animal, click, click, and give them food. Click, click, give them food. Click, click, give them food over and over. All I'm doing is classical conditioning. I'm just doing Pavlovian conditioning. But that clicker becomes a good thing. Food is good, but now the clicker is good. The clicker can act as a reward. So if I do this over and over with my dog, click, click, and give them doggy snacks, click, click, doggy snacks, I do this for a few days, boy, does that dog really love hearing the click, click sound. So now I could say, sit. And if the dog sits, I click, 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 and that's rewarding. That's a conditioned reinforcer. And that will create those associations. This is really important in animal training, which we'll come to later. Okay, let's think about making sense of this really simple thing, the stimulus response idea. So let's take the game baseball. A baseball, what does it travel? Maybe in the professional leagues, 90 miles an hour, 95 miles an hour, a fastball. And it travels so fast that the batter has to start swinging really soon because it's traveling so quickly. And if you ask baseball players, professional baseball players, wow, what are you thinking about when you're up to bat and you're looking at the pitcher? What are you thinking about to hit that ball? The answer's always the same. Well, I don't think. I'm not thinking. The thing is that I've spent my life with somebody pitching a ball at me and me swinging. Batting cages and professional pitchers and little league pitchers, thousands of times. And sometimes when I see that stimulus, the ball coming at me, and I swing, target behavior, and I hit the ball, I'm instantly rewarded. Instantly. Boom! Oh, that felt so good. If I swing and I miss, I'm punished. And I just watch that ball come at me, and when the ball is just a little bit up in the corner of my eye and coming down, that's perfect. It's going to come right in the middle, swing, hit. But if the ball is outside or inside or whatever, and I swing, I get punished. I miss the ball, I get a strike, or I hit it poorly. Time after time after time. And then all it is see the ball swing. See the ball swing. And there isn't thinking, there's just doing. We do this all the time. When you're driving, you have these automatic behaviors. Check the mirror, put the blinker on, turn. You can be listening to music, you can be talking with your friends, but you've been driving for so long, everything is automatic. Stimulus, I hear the engine rev, I see the brake lights in front of me, I cover my brake. I see in the distance a yellow light, I cover my brake. I get really close to the light and it turns yellow, I step on the accelerator just a little bit. All automatic. All these behaviors, these very complex behaviors of your body are just a stimulus causes the behavior. Why? Because in the past, they have followed with something good. And I remember I lived in England for 2 years, and when we first got there, I had to drive on the left side of the road, and the steering wheel was on the right side of the car. You want to talk about disorienting. I'm sitting in the passenger seat with a steering wheel in front of me, and I'm having to shift, right? It wasn't an automatic car that we had. So I had to shift with my left hand, and while I started that, my wife wanted to talk to me and say, hey, look at all these things. I said, oh, be quiet. I have to focus because everything in my brain that's automatic wants me on the right side of the road. So I had to keep in my brain, I'm driving on the left, I'm driving on the left, I'm driving on the left, I'm turning on the left, constantly for days. And then it became kind of automatic. I just drive on the left side of the road. I just shift with my left hand. Oh, this is fine. I don't think about it anymore. Drove all over the country, had a great time. But what did I do when I came back to the United States? The very first thing I did, I got in a car and I drove on the left side of the road. And my wife had to calmly say, we're in America now, drive on the right. Why? Because it was automatic. Because I wasn't thinking. It was at an unconscious, not declarative level. The stimuli caused the behavior. Think about this. Now, in college, I was a springboard diver. This is what I did. And I had to land on the diving board, and the one dive I really liked doing is 1.5 with 3 twists. That was my dive. Well, I had to flip 1.5 times. I had to twist around 3 times, all in about a second and a half. And then I had to dive in and not make a splash. And diving was a great example because if I didn't do it right, I was punished quickly. I'd land on my stomach, I'd land on my back, I'd land on my face. It hurt. And I was punished instantly for what I just did. But if I went in the water nicely, I got rewarded instantly. So what do? You do hundreds and hundreds of dives every practice. And then when you're in a competition, you're not really thinking. Same with gymnasts. This isn't a thinking process. This is a practice process. Stimulus, response, stimulus, response, stimulus, response. I want you to pull yourself out of thinking cognitively, declaratively, The reason I do all of my actions, all of my behaviors, is because I'm constantly thinking about the outcome. I'll get this. I'll do that. My car will drive correctly. We don't do that. That's not our lives. That's not animals' lives. We're stimulus response animals. Oh, occasionally we'll stop, we'll contemplate, we'll think, but the day-to-day actions of our behavior are stimulus response without thinking of consequences. We've just been trained. Do this behavior, get a good outcome. And it doesn't mean that you're getting tossed a liver snap every time you do something good. You're just successful. You got in the right lane. You didn't crash. Nobody swerved. You made it to your destination. That's rewarding. Okay, so when we're thinking about instrumental procedures, we can talk about different types. We can have discrete trials and free operant. I'm going to come back to this. So a discrete trial would be like starting an animal at the beginning of the maze, runs to the end, gets food, the trial is over. Now we wait some time, we put the animal at the beginning of the maze or the runway, and we do it again. Discrete, meaning that a trial begins, a trial ends, some time, and then it starts again. In free operant, the animal chooses the beginning and end of each trial. This would be like in a Skinner box or operant chamber where the animal's pressing a lever. It gets to choose when it presses the lever to get food. We don't stop it. It chooses when to begin and press lever. It's free. It doesn't have a beginning and an end necessarily. So here are some of the measures. We measure latency, or we can measure speed, running speed, latency to response, how long it takes to run, number of errors, number of correct choices. These are all the kinds of measures to look at instrumental conditioning and learning. Some interesting kind of things happen. Like Guthrie is a very famous learning theorist, and he did this thing with cats. Cats were placed in a puzzle box. They moved a pole in the center in any direction in this open to open a door. And it wanted to get out. Very similar to Thorndike, except for it could hit it with its to the left, it could hit it to the right, it could hit it with its head, it could hit it with its butt. That's whatever the way it hit it, it was fine. It was going to let it go. Each cat would show these very similar ways of hitting it because that's what it did first. So you had some cats who got out by coming up to it and hitting it with its butt. And every time you put the cat back into this puzzle box, it would go up and it could hit it with its face, it could hit it with its paw, everything worked. But this cat always hit it with its butt. And this cat always hit it with its tail. And this cat always hit it with its paw. And every time it got back in, that's the behavior it did. Why? It sees the pole, and that caused the behavior. Caused the behavior that was rewarding in the past, which was very specific for each cat. This leads us to this idea of what's called superstition and superstitious learning. We see superstitions all the time. You probably have superstitions of your own. These superstitions can be part of religion, they can be part of behavior, but mostly they're just the fact that sometimes our behaviors produce good or bad outcomes, and we make that association between seeing that stimulus and that response or avoiding that response. I think the Guthrie experiment is example. The cat hit it with its butt, and that's the way it works. That's the way this works for it, right? So Skinner did a very famous experiment on superstitions. So he put the pigeon in a operant chamber, and he just randomly, regardless of the animal's behavior, about every 15 seconds it would just drop some food. And 6 of the 8 animals performed specific behaviors just before the food dropped. Let me give you an example. So the 15 seconds go by, and you would hear this click, click sound, because that's the food dropping. Click, click, food drops. That's the S1. And so one pigeon just happened to be turning around. Click, click, it just happened to be turning around. And then, it got some food. Click, click, and it would turn around. And it would then eat the food. Click, click, turn around. It didn't have to turn around. It didn't have to do anything. It could just eat the food. Because it happened to be doing a response when the click, click sound happened, and that was then followed by food, the click, click made the animal turn around. Some of the birds hop back and forth. And now that bird, every time it heard click, click of the food dropping, it would hop left, hop right, eat the food. Click, click, hop left, hop right, eat the food. Another animal moved back and forth. Another one bobbed its head. None of these behaviors had to be done to get the food. But they created these behaviors because a stimulus followed by a behavior was then rewarded. They just happened to be doing certain behaviors. And this is what helps to explain human superstitions. Sometimes we happen to be doing a behavior when something follows that's good, and we're like, oh, got to do that again, got to knock on wood, got to do that. Now, I see this sometimes. We live up in the foothills, and there's a casino nearby, and it's really the closest place to get food, so sometimes my wife and I, we go over and we get some sushi. They have really good sushi at this casino for some reason. And then we walk around and we maybe lose $20 in some slot machines. Any more than $20 and it stops being fun. But as a behaviorist, as a psychologist, I'm more interested in walking around and seeing what people do. And you see this pool of people with their superstitious behaviors. A very common one is for people to rub the slot machine. They push the button and then they rub it. I've seen people who had a little troll doll, a little troll doll with funny hair, and every time they pushed the button, they had to touch the hair. It had nothing to do with it. Touching the slot machine, rubbing it, doing whatever, has nothing to do with the outcome. But they just happened to be touching the screen when they got the jackpot. Or they heard about it from somebody else. You know what? One time I was playing and I pushed the button and then I was touching the screen and I got a jackpot. I think touching the screen, right? That none of these behaviors cause any difference in the slot machine. But you see them walk to a casino and look at the superstitious behavior. So I found this video that shows it. None of those behaviors had anything to do with the random number generator that are inside of slot machines. Slot machine's going to do what it's going to do. Touching it, fondling it, making funny noises, touching your little troll doll's hair, none of that does. But if you talk to people at a casino who do this, they are certain that that behavior, that superstitious behavior, helps them. Why? Because sometimes they touch it and they get rewarded. Because you don't remember very easily the time where you pushed a button and you fondled the screen of a slot machine and nothing happened. You don't remember that. You remember that time you pushed the button, you fondled the screen, and you got the jackpot. You're like, oh, that was right. So now, press the button, see the screen, S1, the screen now is going. Touch it, because occasionally what follows is rewarding. It's a little weird, but humans and rats, we have more in common when it comes to this stuff than we are different.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills.
I'm sorry, that's just weird. But from a psychologist's point of view, it's pretty cool. Finally, to get very complex behaviors, sometimes you have to not wait for the full behavior to show. You have to reward part or close to the behavior and get it closer and closer and closer. This is called shaping. So I used to do this when I was at Oxford and I was trying to get a starling, a bird, to peck a key light. They peck the key light to get food. But I can't just wait there and wait for them to peck this key light. They've never seen the key light. They'll not do it. So what I would do is I would stand outside their cage with a little button. And every time I pushed the button, some food dropped. And they're little hungry little birds. So I'd stand there, and when the bird was in the front of the cage, not near where the key light was, I wouldn't press the button. But then when it got just a little bit close to the key light, I'd press the button and food dropped. And then it would move around, and then it would get close to the button and I'd drop food. Now I wanted to peck it. It's not pecking the food, pecking the key light. It's just getting close. And I do that for a while, and then if it got close to the key light, I didn't give it food. It had to point its little beak in the direction of the key light. And I'd look, and as soon as it pointed its beak at the key light, I'd drop it some food. I'd do that for a while. And then I would change. Now it cannot just look at the key light. It cannot just be close to it. It actually has to touch it. And so as soon as I saw it touch the key light, I'd give it food. And it was over there already because it got rewarded for being over there, and it got rewarded for looking at it. And I'd do that for a while. And then finally, it could only get rewarded by pecking the key light. This whole process of working with a starling like this, from beginning to end, maybe took about an hour and a half. And then the animal would just peck the key light to get food. We call that systematic approximation, as one behavior is continued and a new one is required to receive the reward. Shaping and having the animal do closer and closer to the actual behavior. And from this, you can get very complex behaviors. Train a mouse to do some amazing things by first teaching it one thing and giving a reward. Now it does that one thing and has to do something else to get the reward. And suddenly we have very complex behavior. We, as humans, are shaped in this way as well. But we're shaped in a lot of different ways, but usually with algorithms, like in social media. Social media is a perfect example of Thorndike in that we are rewarded when we do stuff. We get likes, we get happy faces, we get emojis, we get whatever. Or we look at our screen and there happens to be the thing that we find most rewarding. Maybe especially when it comes to like videos or images. And they keep record of what can modify and shape our behavior to do one thing. The target response of social media is time staring at your screen. And these algorithms look to see what causes you to stay on the screen longer. You stayed on the screen for 4 minutes. And other people who have similar interests to you, right, you're connected, they did these things. They showed them these videos and they were on the screen 5 minutes. So they begin showing you those videos. This is nothing a person does. A computer algorithm does this. And so you'll start seeing videos show up in your screen or images that you tend to look at most. So when I'm on social media or on my phone or watching a video on YouTube or something, so I'll get diving videos because I used to be a diver and gymnast videos. There's this woman in UK is really good at jump roping. I like her jump roping is amazing, so I watch that for a few more seconds. Suddenly I'm seeing jump roping videos. Cute animals, funny birds, smart birds. I'm always seeing crows doing stuff because if I see a crow solving a problem, I'll watch that video 3 seconds longer than any other video and they will push it. So each time I'm on a little bit longer because they're rewarding me with the thing that initiates that behavior. It's a bit insidious, but we're going to talk more about that.